وصلى الله على آله وصحبه ومن والاه ثم أما بعد. To proceed, today inshallah we will go over Kitab al-Hadood, or the book on Hadood, fixed penalties. And this is part of our discussion of the penal law, or the segment on penalties in Islam, criminal law in Islam. Although most of the crimes are not particularly mentioned here, because we are talking mainly about two different types of crimes in this particular segment. One of them is equal retribution or qisas, and the other one is Hadood, which are the fixed penalties that have been fixed by the revelation. But most of the crimes that you would find in any secular law are not included here, because for most of these crimes there is a discretionary punishment. It is left up to the legislatures or the judiciaries to determine the punishment for those crimes. But only and this is like a very large segment that is not discussed in detail in the books of fiqh. It is usually given like a chapter, which is the chapter of ta'zir, bab al-ta'zir, the chapter on discretionary punishments. So today, inshallah, we'll talk about Kitab al-Hadood, and as we have been doing, we are going over fiqh from al-Umdat, which is a Hanbali manual of fiqh written by Imām ibn Qudāmah, who died in the year 620 after the Hijrah. He wrote different books on the Hanbali madhab, including the al-Umda, al-Muqna, al-Kafi, and the greatest of all, al-Mughni. And we're going over the commentary, a little bit of a comparative commentary on his book al-Umda. So we're up to the segment on penalties. We finished the fiqh of worship. We finished the fiqh of financial transactions. We finished the fiqh of inheritance. We finished the fiqh of family. We finished the fiqh of oaths and vows. We finished the fiqh of foods and drinks. And then we finished the fiqh of oaths and vows. And we started the book on penalties. We finished the equal retribution, which is qisas, and wounds, and facial wounds, and so on. And now we're up to the Kitab al-Hadood, or the book of al-Hadood, or fixed penalties. And once we finish this segment, we will move on to jihad. When we come back from Ramadan, inshallah, or from Ramadan's vacation, then we'll start the book on jihad, and then the book on the judiciary, and that will be it, inshallah. And they are smaller in size, so hopefully we have only a few months to finish the entire fiqh. So Imām ibn Qudāmah rahimahullah ta'ala said in his book al-Umda, under the book of al-Hadood, or fixed penalties, لا يجب الحد إلا على مكلف عالم بالتحريم ولا يقيمه إلا الإمام أو نائبه. The hadd punishment is only binding against one who is mukallaf, which means legally liable, and aware of the prohibition. No one other than the Imam or his deputies, authorities, may execute it. The Imam or his deputies is a reference to the authorities. So the authorities will execute the hadd. It is not left up to individuals to do so. So now we will begin by a little discussion about al-Hadood. And certainly the discussion of al-Hadood is a very interesting and exciting discussion. Whenever people think, particularly non-Muslims, particularly in the West, whenever they think of Islam, they think of al-Hadood, the punishments. And Muslims also tend to do the same thing. When Muslims think of the law, when Muslims think of Sharia, when Muslims back home in Muslim countries and Muslim majority countries, because honestly speaking, Muslim majority countries, except for one or two, do not rule by the Sharia necessarily in its entirety. But when we even say that, what do we mean by that? We usually mean that they don't apply the Hadood. Because in most of these countries, most of the laws are actually derived from the Sharia. But just the fact that they do not apply the Hadood makes it feel to us like they don't rule by the Sharia. Is this like warranted, justifiable? You know, yes and no. Why is it a yes and no? Yes, it is justifiable because the Hadood seems to be the sticking point between the thesis and antithesis, the West and the East. You know, Muslims and non-Muslims, particularly the Occident, you know, the West. It seems that this is the issue, you know, that creates most of the controversy. And it seems for many Muslims that unless we apply the Hadood, we're still under imperial rule, or we are still not completely liberated, we're not completely free. So that is the feeling. And certainly, like oftentimes, feelings are not dispelled by sort of intellectual discourse because they are feelings. And you know, if you studied marital counseling, you would know that feelings are not to be basically intellectualized or rationalized. You just have to address them as feelings. And so that's why, to a great extent, it is a yes. The answer is yes. But when you say no, you're also justified to say no because the Hadood are less than 1% of the Sharia. Well, if you think about the Sharia is about everything. It's about how you conduct yourself. It is God's prescription for you as an individual, for the society at large, but for you as an individual primarily, because your religion is about your bilateral relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it rules your basically, or it guides your practice and your daily lives. From the time you wake up in the morning, just the fact that you went to sleep on your right side, that's Sharia. You wake up in the morning and you say the dhikr, that is Sharia. You know, you go to the bathroom and make wudu, Sharia. It's pretty much everything. You say salamu alaikum when you're way out to your family, Sharia, and everything. Then you go to work, and then you try to be conscientious, and you try to do your work well, and you try to do your work with ihsan. That is Sharia. But then it is a reductionist sort of behavior to think of Sharia as Hadood, and to think that as long as the Hadood are not applied, the Sharia is not applied. So this is something that we have to be aware of. You have to be aware of sort of the feelings that you may validate. It's not unjustifiable. But at the same time, you will have to really know what is happening here. The Sharia is not just the Hadood. The Hadood are less than 1% of the Sharia. And we're not going to talk about contingencies here, and we're not going to talk about whether they have excuse not to or they don't. Muslim governments and Muslim legislatures and judiciaries and so on. This is not a discussion that belongs here or belongs to us. We live in the West. We're not basically aspiring to impose the Hadood or the Sharia on anyone. And as far as the East and as far as the Muslim majority countries, what our attitude towards this should be is pretty simple. Defer to them. You know, whether you belong to the right or the left of the Muslim spectrum, whether you are on the stricter side or the more sort of liberal side, just defer to them. Please stay quiet. It's not your business. So to theorize for them from a distance and basically to accuse them of strictness, extremism, or laxity and heedlessness and so on. It is basically very arrogant of you and very insensitive, inconsiderate, and the whole list of just like bad terms. I think it's not your business. It could be your business from an intellectual perspective only, but not basically think of them in any negative way. Wherever you belong on the spectrum and wherever they belong on the spectrum. So it is very unbecoming, very unbefitting of a Muslim youth, a 20-year-old Muslim, to basically think bad of people that are considered to be people that spend their life trying to normalize Islam's place in the public space, such as Muhammad Salim al-Awa and Tariq al-Bishri. And I'm giving examples from Egypt because this is what, where I'm from, and I'm aware of those people. And they may seem to be to the sort of the Muslim youth growing up in America and having sort of this like identity issue and wanting to look strict and to look, practicing, they may look like too loose and too compromising, those individuals, like, Muhammad Salim al-Awa and Tariq al-Bishri and others. But at the same time, these are the people who spend their lives and sacrificed and risked their freedom, spent their lives trying to normalize Islam's place in the public space, and you being who you are and just finished high school and you were involved in all kinds of things and just became practicing last year or maybe a couple of months ago, and now starting to have like ideas about those people. It's just so immature is such a very kind word for this. But anyway. So the idea, the issue of al-Hadood, like I said, we will examine it here from an intellectual sort of standpoint because it is important for us as Muslims to be comfortable with what Allah had legislated. وَتَمَّتْ كَلِمَةُ رَبِّكَ صِدْقًا وَعَدْلًا لَا مُبَدِّلَ لِكَلِمَاتِهِ. And your Lord, the word of your Lord has been fulfilled in truth and in justice. صِدْقِ فِي الْأَخْبَارِ, that is truth, about the declarative, descriptive part of the revelation, and the adlan, and injustice, that is justice in al-ahkam, in rulings, that's the imperative or the prescriptive part of the legislation. We have to be comfortable with this. Therefore, we do need to study these things, and we need to be aware of them, and we need to be comfortable with them as Muslims. What Muslim majority countries will do now is their business, and we defer to them. And when you get into discussions with your compatriots, your countrymen, just say to them, I defer to the people, and they also should defer to them and should not determine for them what they do with their own countries, because supposedly they are independent countries. So let us talk about the issue of al-Hadood. What are al-Hadood? Al-Hadood are basically 4 different punishments, but when it comes to certainty of Hadood, we're talking about 4 different punishments. 2 of them were mentioned in Surah al-Ma'idah, 2 of them were mentioned in Surah al-Nur, and if you try to remember, Surah al-Ma'idah is the last surah of halal and haram that was revealed. Surah al-Nur was revealed in the middle of the Madani period, so like about 5 to 6 years after, the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ. So the middle of the Madani period and the end of the Madani period for Surah An-Nur and Surah Al-Ma'idah. What are the 2 that were revealed in Surah An-Nur? سورة أنزلناها فرضناها أنزلنا في آيات بينات لعلكم تذكرون الزانية والزاني فجلدوا كل واحد منهما 100 جلدة ولا تأخذكم بهما رأفة في دين الله إن كنتم تؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر وليشهد عذابهما طائفة من المؤمنين الزاني لا ينكح إلا زانية أو مشركة والزانية لا ينكح إلا زان أو مشرك وحرم ذلك على المؤمنين والذين يرمون المحصنات ثم لم يأتوا ب4 شهداء فجلدوهم 80 جلدة ولا تقبلوا لهم شهادة أبدا وأولئك هم الفاسقون. So the two that were, it's verses verse number 2 and verse number 4. Verse number 2 is about الزانية والزاني فجلدوا كل واحد منهما 100 جلدة. You know, the fornicator and the fornicatress, flog each one of them 100 times. And don't let sympathy prevent you from applying the rule of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or what Allah had prescribed, and to the end of the ayah. And then the other one, which is number 4, it's about people who accuse muhsaneen, which muhsan means what? Means apparently chaste, not necessarily proven, apparently chaste people. Muhsan in this respect, because muhsan could mean different things when it comes to different rulings. Like if, you know, but in this particular respect, it does not mean someone who was previously married. You know, in zina punishment, when we talk about muhsan, you know, the difference between muhsan and non-muhsan, then it is referring to someone who has been previously married and basically consummated the marriage. But when we're talking about muhsan in the qazf, which is accusation of chaste people of fornication, it is about chastity. If someone's chaste, they are muhsan, apparently chaste. They are muhsan. And apparently chaste means what? Means that the zina has not been proven against them, and they have not admitted to it. That's it. And then they are apparently chaste. So then the crime of qazf, وَالَّذِينَ يَرْمُونَ الْمُحْصَنَاتِ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَأْتُوا بِأَرْبَعَةِ شُهَدَاءَ فَجَلِدُوهُمْ 80 جَلْدَةً وَلَا تُقْبَلُوا لَهُمْ شَهَادَةً أَبَدًا. And those who accuse chaste women, but it applies to men as well. It says women, because that's usually what people have done, but it also applies to men, those who accuse chaste women of fornication and then fail to produce 4 witnesses, flog them 80 times, almost like zina. So 180, it's almost, you know, like zina. Flog them 80 times and do not ever accept their testimony. And these are the fasiqun. And I'm not going to translate fasiq for you, but these are the fasiqun. So these are the 2 in Surah Al-Nur, and we can go back to them because basically to establish the punishment for zina, and then in two verses down from this, to establish an evidentiary standard that is almost unattainable for, you know, adult male witnesses seeing, you know, the act, seeing the male organ into the female organ, like the eyeliner stick going into the container, its container. That is an evidentiary standard that is almost impossible to attain. That's why in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was never based, the crime was never based on the testimony of 4 witnesses, but rather admission, confession. So there is something that we want to discuss when we come back to it. But the other 2 verses in Surah Al-Ma'idah that talk about al-Hadood, they talk about sariq wa sariqa. Let me go back. Okay. السارق والسارقة فاقطعوا أيديهما جزاء بما كسبا نكالا من الله والسارق والسارقة فاقطعوا أيديهما جزاء بما كسبا نكالا من الله والله عزيز حكيم. So the thief, male or female, then cut off or amputate their hands جزاء بما كسبا, as a recompense or as a punishment for what they have committed, نكالا من الله, and a form of basically punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wallahu azizun hakim, and Allah is almighty and all wise. So this is one. It's about the sariq wa sariqa. And then the other one, إنما جزاء الذين يحاربون الله ورسوله ويسعون في الأرض فسادا أن يقتلوا أو يصلبوا أو تقطع أيديهم وأرجلهم من خلاف أو ينفوا من الأرض ذلك لهم خزي في الدنيا ولهم في الآخرة عذاب عظيم. So the punishment جزاء الذين يحاربون, for those who rebel against Allah and His Messenger and spread mischief on earth. أن يقتلوا أو يصلبوا. These are the highway. This is armed robbery, particularly not in town, outside in the desert. Highway banditry, or highway robbery, and these people used to kill, rape, and steal, a mixture of all or some of them. And they cause immense insecurity. Banditry is, basically they cut off the roads. People need to travel for their various purposes. And once they leave town, they are subject to attacks by those highwaymen. And they were known in all cultures. They were known in all places. They were known in all cultures, banditry. So the punishment for them, Allah said, أن يقتلوا, to be killed, أو تقطع أيديهم وأرجلهم من خلاف, or to have their hands and feet cut off, cross cut off, so cross, right and left, or left and right. من خلاف أو ينفوا من الأرض, or to be exiled. And to be exiled here, the scholars would say, to put them in jail is a form of exile. ذلك لهم خزي في الدنيا. This is a disgrace for them in this life, and in the hereafter they will have a severe torment or punishment. So these are the four that are mentioned in the Quran. So what are they again? The two in Surah An-Nur are al-zina, al-qadhf, and the two in Surah Al-Ma'idah are al-sariqa, al-hiraba. Haraba is banditry. Sariqa is special type of theft. It's not all theft, but anyway, special type of theft. Al-qadhf is accusation, sort of unproven accusation of fornication. I guess that's the best translation. Unproven accusation of fornication. If you say libel, it's not. It's too wide. Zina is fornication. So these are the ones that are agreed on by all scholars, by consensus. These are 4 Hadood. That's it. As far as certainty. Add to them one that is accepted by the vast majority of scholars. And why did I separate this? Because some scholars said it's not a had. And I'll tell you why they said it's not a had. That is had shurb al-khamr, al-shurb, drinking wine. They said it is not a had, although there is a report from Anas that the Prophet ﷺ flogged someone 40 times for it, and Ali radiallahu anhu also said the Prophet flogged 40 times for it. But when a person was brought to the Prophet ﷺ after drinking, the Prophet ﷺ, the hadith of Abu Hurairah, the Prophet ﷺ said, اضربوه فَمِنَّ الضَّرِبُ بِيَدِهِ وَمِنَّ الضَّرِبُ بِنَعْلِهِ وَمِنَّ الضَّرِبُ بِثَوْبِهِ. So the Prophet ﷺ said, just beat him. And then they beat him. They said, Abu Hurairah said, so we beat him with our hands or with our garments and with our shoes or footwear, sandals, in fact. So that doesn't look like a sort of a fixed penalty here. So that is why there is this, a little controversy about this, whether it's a fixed penalty or it's just a punishment. And the other fact is that it has not been revealed in the Quran. And all of the other Hadood that are agreed on have been revealed in the Quran. They are Hadoodullah, they are the fixed penalties determined by Allah. That's not to say that Allah does not reveal to the prophets things, but they're not in the Quran but in the Sunnah. But then why is everything else established in the Quran and this one is not? So it is a little bit different from the other Hadood, and this would have legal ramifications afterwards. But this is basically number 5, and you could pretty much say, when it comes to the agreement of the scholars, that this is it. So what are the other ones that drinking? Okay, so what are the other ones that are controversial? There are other Hadood that are controversial. Do you remember that the Maliki said qatl al-ghila, which is treacherous killing, is not equal retribution, does not belong to equal retribution? Treacherous killing is when you tell someone, meet me at the cemetery, and then you go and kill them, or meet me outside town, and so on. It involves some deception and some treachery. And Imam Malik said that this is not it's not about equal retribution. There is no afwa, there is no pardoning. It is a had. It is a fixed punishment. And they have their proofs, but this is not the time for this discussion. So, qatl al-ghila, which is ghila, murder, is one that is question mark. Is it a had or not? Now, which one else is a had? Well, let's go over liwat first. Liwat, which is basically sodomy. Liwat is for the Hanafis, for Imam Abu Hanifa. Imam Abu Hanifa said, of course, all of them, not all of them, there is even reporting consensus here would be a little bit like ludicrous, because reporting consensus is when there is possibility that there was disagreement, but there was no possibility of disagreement here. So, but let's also say that by consensus, all of them agreed that it is a crime. But they did not all agree that it is a had crime. Imam Abu Hanifa said it is punishable because he said that there is no proof from the Quran or Sunnah that it is a had crime. So Imam Abu Hanifa said that it is punishable by ta'zir, discretionary punishment. Abu Yusuf and Muhammad said it is like zina. It is like zina. And they basically agreed with the majority that it is like zina. Malik said they are to be killed regardless. In the Maliki madhab, the punishment is severer than zina because they don't make the distinction between muhsan and non-muhsan. It is death penalty for both muhsan and non-muhsan. The Shafi'is in the authorized view and the Hanbalis in the authorized view treated it just like zina. So any act of sodomy, whether it is between male and male or between male and a female that is not married to them, well, what if it is a female that is married to them? It is haram still, but of course it is not punishable by had. Of course it's not punishable by had. For someone to do this with their wife, it is haram, but it is not punishable by had. And it shouldn't be punishable by had, of course. So that's the discussion on liwat that they had. So in the Hanbali madhab, in addition to the 5, if we are because we're Hanbali here, so in addition to the 5, we will add liwat, not the ghila, because that's a Maliki thing, so we'll keep it out. So we will add liwat in the Hanbali madhab. We don't even need to make liwat a separate category in the Hanbali madhab because in all honesty, they just treat it as zina. They consider it a form of zina. So then what is the other one that they talked about or they disagreed over? What's the other had that they disagreed over? Apostasy. Ridda. apostasy or ridda. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole discussion. I have written something on ridda and whether the punishment of ridda can be suspended. So if you put my name, Google my name and apostasy and suspended, you'll probably find the document. But I'm not going to get into this discussion. I'm not going to talk about who basically said that ridda is not punishable by death, but like imprisonment and like al-Nakhai and others, or even ascribed to Umar radiallahu anhu. But the majority of scholars agreed that apostasy is punishable. It's a capital crime. That's the majority of the scholars. The Hanafis, they said it was not a capital crime for women because to some extent, they are internalizing that ridda is a rebellion against the state. So why is it not a capital crime for women? Because women are not going to be violent about it. They are not going to be fighting against you if they left the religion. But during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was like, the Muslimin and the Kuffar and an ongoing struggle. So when you left the community. That is, to some extent, high treason. And usually when people left, they went to Quraysh. And usually when people left, they would be fighting against you. So it looks like the Hanafis internalized this, although they did not say it, but they internalized it. And that's why they said for a woman it is not punishable by. But anyway, but aside from this, if we're talking about the majority, and certainly the Hanafis agreed also for men, they said it is a crime, it's a capital crime. But is it a had? And there is a huge difference between being a had because it's not subject to negotiation. It's not subject to suspension. Hadood like Sariqa has been suspended by Umar radiallahu anhu. Like Sariqa has been suspended, but this is a suspension that is basically warranted because of circumstantial variables, and it is a temporary suspension. Temporary suspension because of the circumstantial variables. But if we say that it is a had, then it is not subject to discussion, negotiation, suspension, and it is not a had. Honestly speaking, it is not a had. And that's the Hanbali position. The Hanbali position is that apostasy is a valid punishment, or the death penalty for apostasy is a valid punishment that has been prescribed, but it is not a had. And for many reasons, I would say that it's quite obvious that it's not a had, because did the Prophet ﷺ ever suspend the establishment of had after the establishment of proof or the crime? No. Once the evidentiary standard is reached or someone admits, then no one can suspend it. هل قبل أن تأتيني به, when Safwan ibn Umayyah, forgave or pardoned the person that stole their garment, the Prophet ﷺ said, had you done this before you brought him to me? Like, why are you too late? You should have forgiven him before you brought him to me. Because now that you had brought him to me, it's not up to me. It's a had. It's a had of Allah. It's a fixed penalty by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not up to me. But then when it comes to apostasy, how many people apostatized during the time of the Prophet ﷺ and he left them? They apostatized in his face and he left them. So that is why we're saying that it is not a had, and that's the position in the Hanbali method. So now these are the ones that have been, described as Hadood, whether they are agreed on or almost agreed on, or almost agreed on, or controversial, But then, if you try to put things in perspective, these are just it, and everything else is discretionary punishment. And now, let us add a few things now. Let us add a few things. So people now, like I told you, when it comes to what the Muslims should do, how the Muslims should approach these matters in Muslim majority countries, we are not certainly imposing the Sharia on anyone here. We are living by the Sharia because it is basically not about the Hadood, it's about how we conduct ourselves in our lives, but we're not imposing the Sharia on anyone. And as far as Muslim majority countries, we defer to them to decide for themselves. They are independent countries and their people should be free to decide for themselves, and should not be listening to Muslim minorities in the West, and they should not be listening to the West in general. They should just do what is good for them after sort of thorough, societal discussion or discourse and investigation. But from our perspective, we want to be comfortable with what Allah had revealed, and you will see that in the article that I sent you, if you think that the Hadood are cruel, whenever you think of anything, how do you ascertain that you're right and it's not just your feelings, that your impressions that are based on your personal inclinations, personal dispositions, or cultural dispositions? How do you verify this? How do you know what is right and wrong? Because, like, if the very unsophisticated person is the person who feels that whatever they feel is what it is, which is a crazy idea. Any person who has a little bit of intellectual maturity would be able to tell you that this is such a crazy idea. To think that what you think is right just because you think it is right is such a crazy idea. So how do you believe, like, you think that this is cruel? How do you prove it? How do you prove that it is cruel? How do you prove that it is wrong? Do you remember the discussion that we had before about what's moral? And we said that, from the virtue ethics, Aristotelian virtue ethics, and then we had, in the modern moral philosophy, we had two different strands, the deontological and the teleological. The deontological is the categorical, and the other one is the utilitarian. Okay, so the categorical, they say, that's the Kantian, the categorical. The deontological, it is basically duty-based. This is purpose-based. Duty-based, they say that there are certain things that are just categorically right or wrong. Lying is categorically wrong. But how do you prove this? Kant said, because he has to prove it. Kant said, universalize it. Universalize it. If you do it to others, would you like it done to you? Would you like everybody doing it? Would it work if everybody is doing it? Certainly it would be a problem. If all people are lying. But Kant also can be radical in this concept, and the utilitarians can prove the categorical sort of ethics radical in many concepts. Like if someone, you remember the example that I told you before, like a tyrant, he's trying, like someone, like a poor guy is trying to escape from a tyrant, and that tyrant comes and you're hiding them, and that tyrant comes and says, where is so-and-so? And then, like, should you lie? Islam tells you lie. To save the poor guy from the oppression of the tyrant. Kant says you don't lie, because lying is categorically wrong. So then the utilitarians will be able to prove Kant wrong here, but generally speaking, he's not all wrong, because in Islam there are certain things that are categorical. Like لا يفضي المرء نفسه بأخيه. If someone tells you like, do you remember the discussion that we had about, kill so-and-so or I will kill you? That if you killed them, you still will be killed because you should not have listened, even if you are about to die. The same, do you remember when we said that this applies to rape as well? So there are certain things that are categorically wrong, and there is no excuse for doing them whatsoever. So it's not all utilitarian, Islamically, and it is not all categorical. But the utilitarian ethics will tell you, the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So Hadood, in this sense, virtue ethics is about what? It is about why you're doing it. If you're doing it for if you're an honorable person, you will be doing it honorably for honorable purpose, and this is what virtue ethics is about. So they say that the same thing could be done by two people, but one of them is virtuous and one of them is not. And if it's done by the virtuous person, then it will likely be like an honorable act for honorable purpose. Okay, so this is it. And we talked about, GEM Anscombe, and we talked about her Modern Moral Philosophy article, the important article, and she said that whether it's this or this, any oughtness ethics, ought to, you ought to, why? Any oughtness ethics that is not coming from the divine lawgiver is going to be moot. Like, it's just going to be like, ought, you ought to, why? So what if I don't do it? And this was truly like sort of an eye-opener for many people. And then after GEM Anscombe, people started to go back to virtue ethics because this ought to is, they figure it's not working. But she may have, because she was a devout Catholic, she may have been alluding to go back to the divine lawgiver. But she was also a virtue ethicist. So if you take the Hadood now, and say, let's examine the Hadood and see if, according to this, the Hadood are wrong, virtue ethics, the Hadood are meant to be applied by virtuous people for the interest of the society, and they're meant to be applied by people who also value honor and value integrity and value truthfulness and value all the list of virtues that Aristotle talked about to an extent that has not been matched by any other generation. If you think of Abu Bakr and Umar and Osman and Ali, and you think of Talha and Zubayr, these are the people who were meant to apply the Hadood. So according to this, there is no problem with the Hadood. Okay, according to the categorical. Okay, now let's put the Hadood to the test according to the categorical ethics of Kant. Universalize. You can never use the new universalizing sort of litmus paper test by Kant in the Hadood, because and in equal retribution. Well, someone killed. If you lock them up, put them in jail, whoever told you that this is not cruel? Limiting people's freedom by incarcerating them is cruel, isn't it? Well, so you say to Kant, whoever told you. In fact, Peter Moskos wrote a book called In Defense of Flogging. In Defense of Flogging. Peter Moskos is like an associate professor, maybe professor now of law in some university here in the US. And he was a veteran a police officer. And he wrote a book called In Defense of Flogging to tell you that flogging is actually kinder to the offenders than imprisonment. It is better for rehabilitation, basically letting them go back to the society, rehabilitated, and not further hurting them and further hurting their chances of reaccommodation as righteous members of the society. It's an interesting book. I have it. You should probably read it. So you say to Kant, well, whoever told you that these punishments are wrong. We're not talking about bringing like an innocent person and flogging them or anything of that nature. Someone committed a crime. You will have to punish them. Okay, we are saying that at the individual level, that punishment may be better for the rehabilitation of this person at the individual level of the offender itself. Forget about the society. But when you factor in the society, it certainly may be much better. You know, the idea of severe punishment, when you factor in the society, maybe it's much better. In fact, so this is the categorical one. Certainly, when you test the Hadood against the utilitarian ethics, or you test the Hadood according to utilitarian ethics, the greatest good for the greatest number. The greatest good for the greatest number, certainly the Hadood would win big time. Always win big time, because the interest of this is in the interest of the society to increase the severity of punishment. And I cited here a study by the Policy Studies Journal from 2000, December 2000, Policy Studies Journal. It is a meta-analysis by Sylvia Mendes. The name of the study is Putting Severity of Punishment Back into Deterrence Package. And it basically proves that we have two different limbs. When deterrence package, you want to deter crime. You want to prevent crime in any society. So how do you deter crime? How do you prevent crime in any society? First of all, in Islam, the first thing that Islam does to prevent crime is to establish justice. To establish justice, to establish compassion, to establish kindness, to look after the poor and the needy and all of that. But after you have established justice, how do you specifically target crime in a community where justice has been established? How do you specifically prevent crime? It's the two limbs, two legs. Okay, this is what? The likelihood of getting caught. Likelihood of getting caught. So you improve your sort of policing, you improve your forensic investigation so that you catch the offender. What about this one? Severity of punishment. So whenever a person commits a crime, they're thinking of, am I going to get caught? What if I get caught? What will happen to me? These are the two things. If you improve the likelihood of people getting caught, you deter crime. If you increase the severity of punishment, you deter crime. Now, in liberal societies, they have been trying to basically de-emphasize the severity of punishment. So basically, you do a little bit of community time, like you rape a woman and burn her. We can give you like a few hours of community time, and so on. I'm not saying, just this is an exaggeration. But the idea here is like severity of punishment and likelihood of getting caught. So people have been downplaying the importance of severity of punishment. And they're saying that it's mainly about the likelihood of getting caught. Now, it's not true. So what if it is likely to get caught, but at the end of the day, I'll do a little bit of community service? Well, I'll probably rob this bank. And, if I get caught and have to do a few months in prison, it's not a bad idea. Because if I don't get caught, I'll just be good for the rest of my life. So anyway, robbing, the bank may not have been the best example, I guess, because the banking industry doesn't have the best reputation. No, but what I wanted to say is that if you apply utilitarian ethics, then you cannot basically say that the Hadood are wrong based on your utilitarian ethics, based on categorical ethics, because again, at the end of the day, you will say to Kant, someone committed a crime, someone raped a woman. You're not just going to tell them, goodbye. Something will happen. Whatever will happen to you is categorically wrong. Limiting people's freedom is categorically wrong. Flogging people is categorically wrong to you. But at the end of the day, we will have to do something. And your universalization litmus paper test is not going to work here, because we're not talking about a universal. We're talking about offenders in crimes. And then, as I said, even according to virtue ethics, and it is important that we understand this. It is important that you understand the concept of virtue ethics here, because these Hadood are meant to be applied in a virtuous society, in a society that established justice, in a society that looked out for the poor, in a society where the zakah is given, in a society where Bayt al-Mal is mainly concerned for the sort of the unfortunate and the needy and so on and so forth. So that is why many of our contemporary scholars say that even in our Muslim societies nowadays, like I was just hearing someone as traditional as Sheikh Muhammad Saeed Ramadan al-Bouti, for instance, a very traditional, very conventional scholar. He was saying that if they were to suggest applying the Hadood tomorrow here, and he was from Syria, I would be the first one to oppose it, because you have not really established that virtuous society where the Hadood can be applied within the larger context of a virtuous society. That should not be taken as an argument against Hadood to be just completely canceled. No, it is an argument against the society that you should get your act together. You should improve yourselves, and you should basically aspire to applying the rest of Islam. So when we talk about the Hadood, when we talk about the Muslim countries not applying the Hadood, therefore they are not ruling by the Sharia, therefore they are this or that, there are bigger problems, because based on that virtue ethics, isn't it also Islamic to have righteous governance? Is it also Islamic to have equity and justice? Isn't it also Islamic to have separation of powers? Shuraih ruling against Ali when he was the Khalifa. Separation, sort of institutions that have sort of separation of powers. Aren't these all Islamic things? So the Hadood need to be applied within the context of the above. And to basically skip over all the above and just want to apply Hadood, that will be just injustice. That will be injustice, because it will be a tool in the hands of the powerful to punish the unfortunate and the poor and so on, and to subdue them. But in a society where justice is established, equality is established, separation of powers, and all of these good things that are like completely Islamic, and when there is also compassion and zakah and all of these things, the Hadood will have a home, a place to be applied. And then when they have a place to be applied, what is actually meant by al-Hadood? What is meant by al-Hadood. Do you remember our discussion about Surah An-Nur when we said that, like, verse 2, الزانية والزاني فجلدوا كل واحد منهما 100 جلدة ولا تأخذكم بهما رأفة في دين الله إن كنتم تؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر ولا يشهد عذابهما طائفة من المؤمنين, where it is established the, the flogging for fornication. Okay, and we said that in verse 4 of the same surah, it said if you do not produce 4 witnesses and you accuse someone of fornication, and you do not produce 4 witnesses, you will be flogged yourself 80 times. 80 times? Okay, so what the Hadood did, the philosophy of the Hadood, it's about deterrence. It's about deterrence. Remember, I told you this before. What is the punishment for usury? What's the punishment for eating pork? Why is there a punishment for drinking wine and no punishment for eating pork? Huh? The desire. No one in his right mind would want to eat bacon. No, I'm sorry. Someone may have wanted in the past or something. But that the way it smells and tastes is just like, I never tasted it, but I'm assuming from the smell that it wouldn't be such a great taste. But wine, so the desire, it is deterrence to bring you from, to protect you from human weaknesses. And if you look at all the Hadood, they protect from what? What is zina? Lust. What is qazf? Qazf, anger. Because people usually make that accusation when they're angry. What is stealing? Greed. What is banditry? Everything. They kill and rape and then. What is what's the other had here? Qazf and khamr, drinking wine. What is drinking wine? Addiction. Aren't these extremely powerful, basically extremely powerful influencers of human behavior, lust, anger, greed, and addiction? So the Hadood are meant to tell you, this crime, you deserve for it, and you deserve for it according to whom? According to God. Stoning, flogging, cutting off your hand, and so on. So that's deterrence. But the evidentiary standard was so high that the punishment is practically, hardly applicable. So why would a system do this? Make it so severe, but raise the evidentiary standard so high that's not applicable because of deterrence. Because at the end of the day, that severity in your mind, that is the punishment. And that will make the crime look worse to you and look sort of less attractive to you. But you may say, but also the evidentiary standard being so high, you are preventing justice from being established. No, because as we said before, if it does not meet that evidentiary standard, your right is not lost. I did not cut off the hand of the thief because it did not meet the evidentiary standard. Sometimes, the ambiguities. When the Prophet ﷺ said, "Idra'u al-Hadood an al-Muslimin ma istata'tum, فإن كان له مخرج فخلوا سبيله فإن الإمام أن يخطئ في العفو خير من أن يخطئ في العقوبة. So, ward off the Hadood punishment, from the Muslimin, spare the Muslimin from the Hadood punishment as much as you can. For it is better for the authorities, the Imam, so if he has any exit, the offender has any way out of it, let him go. If the offender has any way out of it, let him go. For it is better for the authorities to err in mercy than to err in punishment. The Muslim scholars took this to heart. There are variant principles that sprouted out of this and other ahadith that are reported from the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. إدراء الحدود بالشبهات is a principle of fiqh that is one of the most popular principles of fiqh. إدراء الحدود بالشبهات. So إدراء الحدود here بالشبهات. Okay, so ward off the hudud by ambiguities. If you look at the ambiguities posited by the Muslim scholars in the books of fiqh, you think this is crazy. You're making the evidentiary standard so hard to reach that if the thief claims that this sort of item was his, that's enough to prove that to get him off the hook, basically. To claim to have any sort of plausible claim that this item is his. For a person to claim that the woman that he had sort of sex with is his wife, even if she denies, that's enough. I mean, unless it is known by everyone that it is not his wife. But the simple claim that it is his wife without proof is enough to get him off the hook. There are certain things, according to the Hanafis, the fact that you pay the prostitute gets you off the hook. Not according to the majority, and it's too far-fetched, and it's just like a bad example. But according to that, or at least some of the Hanafis, I should say, because that is an contractual relationship, and then, but then, Umar radiallahu anhu, Umar, not the Hanafis, Umar, when a woman came to him and said that I was asleep and I have when I sleep, I'm a deep sleeper, and someone just had sex with me when I was asleep, and I didn't wake up until he was done. And she was pregnant. And Umar let her go. And also, if I keep on telling you the examples of those ambiguity, the far-fetched ambiguities, and the Prophet ﷺ is the first one to tell them, just avoid applying the Hadood. They are meant to deter people from these crimes, but avoid applying them as much as you can. When Ma'is came to the Prophet ﷺ, what did he do? He said to him, I committed zina. So the Prophet ﷺ turned away from him. And then he came to him from the I committed zina, purify me. And the Prophet ﷺ turned away from him. And then he came until he did it 4 times. He told him, are you crazy? He said, no, I am not. He told them, maybe you just kissed. He said, no, I did not. He told them, maybe you just hugged. He said, no, I did not. So what am I going to do to you now? Okay. He ordered him to be stoned. And then, when Ma'az felt the heat of the rocks or the stones or the pain and tried to run away, and they did not allow him to run away, the Prophet ﷺ did what? Rebuked them. He told them, you should have let him run away. So what if, the idea here is the Prophet was the first person to apply this. It's not the Muslim jurists who applied this because the Hadood is so severe. The Prophet was the first person to apply this himself. And there are so many. So the Hadood were not meant to basically maim people. They were meant to deter crime. And there was some study that was cited by Dr. Brown in his article about al-Hadood, where not a study, but he cites statistics from the Ottoman Empire, from Constantinople under Ottoman rule. In 500 years, they executed for fornication or stoned for fornication one person in 500 years. And in colonial America between 1608 and 1785, 50 people were executed for sexual crimes. 50 people were executed in less than 200 years in America, one in 500 years in Constantinople under Ottoman rule, in colonial America and Constantinople. So the idea here is that historically speaking, the jurists actually took this hadith to heart. Historically speaking, the jurists actually took this hadith to heart. And they tried to apply it to the point, so the Malikis would consider the pregnancy can last 5 years, and some of them say 7 years. So if someone died and his wife was pregnant after, the majority of scholars don't even consider pregnancy to be a proof on fornication. The Malikis would not consider it if she has any plausible explanation. But the majority said, even without, it is not, like a single woman being pregnant is not a proof that she fornicated whatsoever. And there are just so many such examples. So what I'm trying to get at is that this was part of the deterrence package within the legal framework of Islam, part of the deterrence package. The foundation of the society is one of justice and equity. And within that foundation, within that larger context, the Hadood were meant to be deterrence from crime. They were not simply symbolic. We can't say that. It's not like they're symbolic that they were never applied. No, they were applied, because if they were never to be applied, then they don't cause any deterrence. They don't basically, but they were applied, but they were rarely applied. The evidentiary standard was high. And going back to the point that I wanted to make, when you say, but how could you deter crime if the evidentiary standard is this high? And I got into this to tell you that your civil rights as the victim will not be dropped, and punishment would still be imposed by the authorities, but it is short of the had. The authorities will come up with a punishment short of the had. Not even all Muslim scholars said that it is short of the had. Some of them said it could be worse than the had, but jail time could be prescribed, for instance. If the evidentiary standard was not met, jail time could be prescribed. So, we really know, that there is so much evidence that the person stole this item, because the Hadood have, extremely stringent evidentiary standard. We were not able to establish, within the Hadood framework, we were not able to establish the crime to apply the had. We will apply another punishment that is not the had, because it was obvious that the person committed the crime. And then whatever, all people's rights, equal retribution will be established, and restitution of people's rights and so on, all of that will be established, even if the evidentiary standard for a had crime has not been met. Okay, well, I guess we should take a little time off and come back and finish the chapter on Hadood.